Welcome to Women Winning Divorce with your host, Heather Quick. Heather brings over 20 years of law experience that advocates and empowers women to achieve happier and healthier lives. Each week, we provide knowledge and guidance on different aspects of family law to help lead women through the difficult and emotional legal challenges that they are facing. Listen in as she discusses issues including divorce, custody, alimony, paternity, narcissism, mediation, and other family law issues to provide insight on the journey of women winning divorce. Welcome to the show. I'm Julie Morgan, and I'm joined by your host, Heather Quick. Hi, Heather. How are you today?
I am great, Julie. How are you?
I'm doing well. You know, it's hot outside. I mean, that's just stating the obvious. It is.
It is. I mean, that is Florida, it is. And just like when you think, oh, there's a little breeze today, then it just flips right back around. So
It does. And then at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it'll just start pouring, raining and thundering. And then 5 minutes later, it's done. That's what
I know.
Florida.
The weather's been crazy. The lightning too, it's just like, it's fascinating. The change in the weather around here, that's for sure.
Yes, it is. So if any of you want to move to Florida, if you don't already live here, this is what you can expect. It's great.
Yes, it is. I think everybody knows that because they're all moving here, right? So if you are, I guess that's good. Now you'll know about divorce in Florida.
There you go. And somebody can help you out with that. So today we're talking about something a little similar to what we talked about last week, how to tell college age and adult children you're divorcing. I mean, is there a difference?
There really is. And we'll get into it. I won't blow the surprises, but it is. It's absolutely a different conversation and sometimes a very surprisingly different reaction.
I wonder why.
Well, I think, one, they are, probably used to speaking their mind as, now they're adults and have opinions and ready and able to voice them. And I think also a lot of times they've lived through this marriage. They grew up in it, and there's a lot of feelings and opinions about what they're doing, why now, and why didn't you do it earlier? And again, how does this affect me? And really, this is inconvenient once again.
Do they tend to take the news a little better?
I would say as a whole, no. I would say no. I would say that they tend to take it a little bit harder.
Okay, that's not what I was expecting, right? But I feel like we talked about this a little bit, maybe during when we talked about gray divorce.
Yeah, because, I think they kind of have lived through it, and there are very much extremes like, why didn't you do this years ago? Why did I have to live through all this nonsense kind of thinking? Or now this is really inconvenient for me. Where am I going for the holidays? Like, how am I doing this? Again, because they're adults or young adults, and or college kids, and they are voicing their opinions and how it affects them more so. Because now they kind of have their own life, but it kind of throws them a curveball.
Okay. So, and I was thinking, of course, that young children, when you tell young children, they're just going to be distraught. And you kind of shocked me with that one because some of them may not say anything. But with the older children, they're going to really speak their minds.
Generally so, in my experience from talking with clients and women, they were a bit surprised that, and it is, I think when we talk about telling them, it's the shock a little bit, but then I think a lot goes into it because here they've grown up with this belief and, hey, like, think about this, that's their family home. And, kids go off to college and figure, well, don't want you to mess up their room. They want their room the same. They want to come back and all of a sudden, like, maybe now that home's not going to be there anymore because more likely, when you don't have small children at home, it's the house gets sold. It's a large asset that doesn't stay there with their, like, the kid's shrine, so to speak. So they have a lot more questions than the younger children, and they are going to ask more persistent questions like why, like what happened, and they may be more vocal as to whose side they're on.
Okay. So we're going to, of course, talk a little bit more about their feelings. But tell me this, how should you tell them? Like, should you tell them over the phone? Because, like you said, they may be at college. Like, how should you tell them this news?
I mean, I think news like this is news that should be delivered in person when possible. And I think many individuals might think, and kind of like, I think you were thinking, okay, well, they're adults. I can tell them over the phone. This doesn't have to be, I don't have to make as big of a production about it. However, I think they're just, if possible, to tell them in person. Um, and maybe even the two of you together like that. Again, there's so many variables on that, but because also now with adult children, yeah, they are going to be concerned about how this affects their life, but they're going to have a lot of concern about you, and depending on how old the kids are and how old you are, if we were talking about that gray divorce, they're going to be like, what are you going to do, mom? Like, are you telling me you're going to date? Like, where are you going to live? What are you going to do? They're going to have a lot more questions, and they are probably going to have some other, real life concerns, because now they're adults who have experienced life, and jobs and maybe kids and maybe married, all those kind of things. So now they're going to really probably ask you a lot more questions.
And by the way, you've heard us mention this more than once, gray divorce. We have an entire show about that. You can go to our website, womenwinningdivorce.com, so you can download, subscribe, and listen to that episode. So they're going to have a lot of questions. But tell me this, do you think that they're shocked?
I do think that they will be initially. And I say this because, if they thought in their minds, like, oh my God, why are they together? They should be divorced. Neither one of you have ever taken that action before. So they may be shocked, because they may be like, why now? Why didn't you do this? Like, when it was really difficult for us and we had to live through, whatever it was. Or you may have just had a marriage that on the outside, or even to the kids, didn't really seem bad, seemed comfortable, and everybody was amicable. Then they'll be like, oh my God, this is like, I had no idea. Like, what was so wrong? What's so bad with dad? What's so wrong with mom? Like, how it seems like you guys are happy. I'm so confused. I thought y'all had a good marriage, from their perception. So, and we've talked about too, Julie, like, once you're empty nesters, the kids leave the house, maybe you find you just don't have anything in common anymore. But when the kids were there, like, from their perception, you guys got along, everybody kind of played their part, but you two have grown apart, and there's just not that connection there anymore. And so, I think when that situation, your adult kids might really still be very shocked, because they did not see it coming. They didn't see anything that they would have recognized as a bad marriage, or that anybody was unhappy. So I think there is, generally speaking, going to be some shock.
Okay, generally speaking. Now, getting back to what we just talked about as far as when to tell them, you said that this is news that probably would be best served in person, if it's possible. So let's think about, let's say if it's a child that's away at college. Probably, would you say that this is something you tell them when they're at home for the weekend, or possibly at home for the summer when it's a longer period of time? Because they have a lot going on with them personally as well.
Right. And we talked about in the last episode, like, don't, make this about holidays, but that's when kids from college come home. So that's going to be a tricky one because they're going to have a lot of questions and many of which you may not be able to answer, frankly. They're going to be like, well, I'm away at school. Like, where are you going to live? Where am I going to come home? Who's going to pay my tuition? What about family vacation? They're going to have a lot of things that, like, what am I going to do on my break? And, if you're telling them and, this is just the beginning of the process, you may not have a lot of those answers. And so that's fair. And I think just recognizing that, like, I don't have all those answers. And then you can imagine you're not going to be able to totally reassure them. And they're adults, for one, too. I mean, many women in particular try to tell them, hey, it's all going to be okay. I think that's really important with the younger children, that they're not going to ask as much about the details, and you're going to really do as much as you can to keep things status quo. Well, now you have children that are over 18 in college and deemed adults by the law, but as anyone with children know, that they are still children and depend on you quite a bit. And that's tricky. You may not know, like, I mean, maybe you have a college account for them, so you're going to be set. But even if you do, sometimes there's always these extras that, you may not know. And that's a good thing to talk to your attorney about maybe before, because they're going to most likely ask those questions.
Okay. So you should try to prepare yourself for the questions that you think they're going to ask and possibly ask someone else their input about the questions you may not even come up with.
Correct. I think just at least then you're not. And hey, if you don't know, you don't know. And that's going to create some emotion. Again, they're young adults and within their developmental stage, it is all about them. And they're going to be confused as to why you haven't thought all this through. But now, that's kind of a hard conversation that I think it's important to brace yourself with. I've seen so many women really struggle with their adult children and wanting to still make it all right when the husband's the one with more funds, and you two as a married couple are splitting. You two may not be able to discuss how you're going to handle that initially with the adult children. And your children may have always been very well taken care of, nurtured, and it's a harsh reality for them, and that's different for all of you, and that can be challenging to now say, well, I don't know, but you'll figure it out. You're an adult. I'm not suggesting you say that. I'm making light of it because you can't say that to your kids. They'll be freaking out. But that may be a conversation that needs to happen sooner rather than later, but not initially.
Okay. So just be ready for their feelings on the matter, because you just don't know what's going to happen with how they're going to express themselves.
Correct. And I think if you can at least prepare yourselves, one, your kid. Everybody's got the kids that's going to ask them a million questions. And then the other kids will be like, okay, mom, all right, whatever, go with the flow. We all have different personalities in our children. So you'll know the ones who might not say anything, but they're really got to process, and there's going to be more of that going on with them. So I think it's knowing that they're going to have questions. They are going to have feelings, and they're going to express those, and allowing them that time. They're going to have that sense of loss from what was and their perception of that. And they may need to grieve. And, you just, again, you don't want to overshare. They're going to ask more probing questions than your younger children. But I still very much encourage, keeping the private stuff private, because no good really comes out of that.
And don't bash your future ex.
That's right. That's the hardest thing. I think people feel they want to, because they want to tell him, well, this is exactly why, because he did XYZ. This isn't the best time for that. I don't think there really ever is. I think eventually, maybe, once they're truly adults and once you're on the other side of this, there can be conversations that aren't loaded emotionally. That can be done, but certainly not at this time, because you're about to go through it and they're going to battle with these feelings and emotions and loyalties to one parent versus the other. So I, again, always suggest take the high road. Don't bring them into it. There's really no good result from that.
You're listening to Women Winning Divorce with Heather Quick, owner and attorney of Florida Women's Law Group. We're going to take a quick break here, and when we return, we're going to talk about the reactions and feelings a little bit more of your college-aged and adult children when you tell them you're divorcing. Stay with us. Welcome back to Women Winning Divorce with Heather Quick, owner and attorney of Florida Women's Law Group. Heather, reactions and feelings of adult children, college-age children, when you tell them that you're divorcing, based on what you've said so far, it's kind of similar, but their questions are going to be very, very different.
Yes, and they are going to have questions that are appropriate for their age. And, yes, they're going to go through that grief, anger, sadness, all the same emotions. However, now they're adults. And as we know, it depends, as your children enter the world and are in their 20s, they got a lot to say. And they usually know a lot, think they know a lot, depending on where they are. And so they're going to ask you questions. In a lot of ways, like a lot of it might be, if it comes as a shock, they're going to wonder how they didn't see it. And they're going to really have a lot of questions like, well, what else didn't I know? Like, you guys had this whole different life going on, or how was I oblivious to this? And then, was my whole life a lie, or whole growing up, can get dramatic. But I think that's, realistic, because they are going to question it if they really thought their parents were happy and had a great marriage. And many couples do. They're like, there was nothing egregious. We've just grown apart. We've been married a really long time, and now we kind of want to go our own ways. Many women feel like, hey, this is my time to have a little bit more independence, and I can go out and really seek and be the person that I wanted to be. And that's hard, I think, for adult children, because they want to imagine their parents, as they always were, and what their reality and belief is on what that family life was. So it's going to be, for those kinds of situations, I think there'll be a lot of questions, confusion, and a little shock.
But this really makes me wonder, possibly, are they in denial? If they feel like, oh, there is just no way that this is happening, is the child in denial?
Could be, very much so, and most kids really, I think, when they're happy and healthy, they're absorbed in themselves as young adults and going off to college. And so they just don't maybe see things, and they may be in denial because they're like, they don't want to make changes. They're already going through a big life transition, leaving home, in college, maybe getting their first job. Those are major milestones in the beginning of their life that are supposed to happen, and they aren't, and they're ready in somewhat expecting that. They're not expecting to have to figure out and understand their parents splitting up. And they may, so I think denial's one. They may feel guilty, like, oh my goodness, if I'd only stayed home, this wouldn't have happened.
That's the next feeling I was going to bring up is guilt. You know, do how do they express that guilt, that feeling of guilt?
Just again by questioning, and they may internalize that. So that is really, if they bring that up and say, oh my God, I'm so sorry, maybe even, and I'm not going to say it's specific to a, only child, or but maybe even a youngest child, maybe they're thinking, oh, I left and look, everything fell apart. And of course, that is really very much likely not the reality, but they may sense that, oh, y'all were together, still staying together because I was around. So then they'll feel some guilt one way or another.
And you know what? I'm glad you brought up the only child versus a child that has siblings. I wonder how they take it. An only child. It seems like that's the person that will probably have the most guilt.
I think so. And that's probably something that, just because they know hey, I was there, and they feel more, because, only children, obviously they're, so connected as the only one there. So I would think a guilt and a real concern, I'm sure, for either one parent or the other. Like, okay, now you're alone. How are you going to handle it? Because a lot of kids, I think, will also look at this like, well, how are they going to make it not being together, because they've only known them together.
Yes, and they don't realize that their parents had a life, before each other and before they were born.
Correct. Because they don't really necessarily see that. And so yeah, I think that all of those feelings are normal, and they're going to kind of go through that and express them in different ways.
So this is a major life adjustment, and you alluded to this in segment one of the show. This is a major life adjustment. So, what are some of the things that those adult children and those college age children? What are some of the things that they're really going to miss?
Most likely they're going to miss the family traditions that they have known their whole lives, and that typically is holidays or family vacations, special occasions, things that as a family you traditionally all celebrated together. And that can vary, of course, for all families, but everybody's got something, that was their big time together. And now it may exist, but it's going to be different, because it's not going to be all together, most likely not in the same house. And even if it is in that house, say, one of the parents keeps it, it's going to be different. And they're going to miss that. They're going to not know, like, well, what do we do, at Thanksgiving? Like, who's going to cook? Where are we going to go? And then, well, what about dad, mom, if we come and see you, and who's going to cook for him? And likewise, what about if we go to the grandparents? How's that affect everybody? So yeah, they're gonna go deeper on a lot of that.
Yeah, definitely. And could well, do you think that it would be beneficial, even for the adult children? Do you believe it would be beneficial for the parents to spend maybe the next holiday after this big announcement, the next holiday together, to kind of ease them into the transition?
Yeah, maybe. I think that um, and this is just based on experience, as far as after divorce, men typically, and the statistics show that they do um enter into another relationship much quicker than women. And from that standpoint, um, that could be awkward. So, and that, and or maybe the mom. I mean, kind of when you don't have young kids at home and things like that, you may be very ready to live, your own life and date or whatnot. So I certainly wouldn't promise any of that. And, if they're worried about it, I would certainly not commit to that. Because I think what the kids are going to find is mom and dad like are truly really going to be okay. And they may, date other people, which that's a whole nother thing that, the kids aren't, I don't know if they're not going to be ready for, but it's going to be a shock. It's going to be a change. So I certainly wouldn't promise that. I mean, I know there are people who do that. That is certainly not anything that ever happened in my experience personally. So,
Yes, I would, because I mean the dinner table would just be awkward. It in my,
you know,
guess.
it would have always been at my house. And I'll tell you, they had been divorced a long time before we had graduations and marriages. And it wasn't until my graduation from law school that my parents were actually at the same event together for us as children. That's a long time. And they were together at our weddings, but yet not really friends. It really took, I think, the grandkids. So that's a many, many years. So my experience is different, whereas my mother-in-law is so gracious and she invites her ex-husband, my husband's father, over all the time. And that first time, like I was over there, I was like, that's weird to me. So, some people are much more evolved than my family is all I can tell you. I think it's great if they can do it, but I certainly wouldn't promise it.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. My parents, they're friends, and I'm just like, I don't know how. And yeah, they've been.
Well, and so see, Julie, you come from a more evolved, a more evolved set of parents than mine. Mine are there now, but it took a while. It took till their 60s, maybe in their 50s. So that takes a long time.
They were always friends, and I'm just like, this is odd. To me, it was odd for them to be friends because to me, it didn't make sense that how are you friends and you're not together? But basically, they're better as friends as opposed to partners. Yeah.
So, right. So I think that when it can happen like that, I think that's great because eventually, which, we're not going to get as much into that in this segment, but like life does go on and there are going to be weddings and there are going to be, birthdays, grandchildren, all kinds of events. And your adult children are more likely going to be like, suck it up. I'm not going to different houses. If y'all want to come here and celebrate, have at it. But you better get along because it's not about you. So that's, I think something as, anyone divorcing, that's what you got to keep in mind. Okay, hey, that phase of our lives is raising a family has transitioned. Now we're going to, have a great view on them raising a family. We've got to act like grown-ups when we interact.
Yeah. Tell me this, how do you believe that this makes the children, how do you believe it makes them look at their own relationships, their own romantic relationships? Do you think that they could be successful or do they look at them a different way?
I think that they can definitely be successful, but I think they're going to question a lot. And I think that as, as their parent, and they may or may not question you, they're going to go through those cycles of emotions as, we talked about the anger, the grief, things like that. And be careful. And we're going to talk about like that, like in the next one, but you have an opportunity as their parent to help them in their, like they'll be like, well, mom, I thought this was a great relation, y'all had a great relationship, I'm dating this person, like what did I not see? I think you can be helpful by removing that relationship and share what was good and help them see there was more good than bad, but this, it's just the way it is. And, I mean, I think that could be a whole um show as well. And that's where, when we talked about the parents becoming involved and really having some personal growth and reflection to say, I could have done better. Sure, they could have done better, but I could have. And so then you're not blaming, you're being reflective and saying, well, we got married really young and I never really knew who I was. And, this was my part in it. And I think that there's a time to do that. You got to have some healing before you as the parent can have those discussions. I think so. That's where, again, as we always say, counseling for yourself to be able to still advise them as they're in, different relationships, and how that they're not all messed up, because now their parents got divorced and, they never saw it coming. I'm sure that would be something they might say, and use what was good in the marriage and what you learned maybe to help them.
Make it a teachable moment. Yeah. You're listening to Women Winning Divorce with Heather Quick, owner and attorney of Florida Women's Law Group. We're going to take a quick break here, and when we return, we're going to talk more about not oversharing and treating them like an adult friend. Yeah, let's not do that. Stay with us. Welcome back to Women Winning Divorce with Heather Quick, owner and attorney of Florida Women's Law Group. Heather, we shouldn't overshare. You mentioned this in segment 1, a little bit in segment 2, but let's really expound upon that. Don't overshare. This is not your friend. This is your child, even though they're an adult.
That's correct. That's correct. And it may seem as though you can, because your relationship has transitioned some, obviously, because they are an adult, and there are many things that you do have conversations with them, but that's their father, and so no matter what, it's just not helpful. And it's not healthy for your child. They should not be your confidant. This really is going to put a lot of more stress and anxiety on them if they feel like now they've got to be your emotional support, and that they can't still love their father, the other parent. So that's where that's what that can create. And I don't care what they say, and I want to know, like, they don't, and you really ought not tell them.
That's interesting. You said that they may say, yeah, I want to know. Tell me what happened. Please tell me what happened. That may be the way they're trying to handle it, but no, you shouldn't, you should not respond.
No, and I think of it this way. Okay, and especially we're like talking about, hey, we're talking to them about the divorce. We're still in these early conversations. We're not talking 10 years after the divorce, right? We're talking in it. Let's think, okay, let's give a scenario that your husband cheated, and did all these things. And so that's what you want to share with them, right? Well, they're going to be shocked and upset and angry at them. And, which is kind of what you want. That's why you're telling them. But what if it was you? What if you're the one who cheated? And let's be clear, like, that happens, of course, on both sides. And then think of your child hearing that from your husband as to why the marriage broke up. You don't want that coming from that lens. And so I would suggest that you really say, I don't want to get into all of it because we're still going through it. There will be a time when maybe we can have a discussion that won't be emotionally charged, because, we're both still humans, and that's what kids forget, is that their parents are really just human beings who make mistakes, doing the best they can. Because they are like, well, yeah, but you're my mom and dad, and they want you to continue to have those titles and be together. So, when you're in the middle of it, they're gonna naturally maybe pick sides if you give them too many details. And I think that's why you say, I don't want you picking. There are no sides. We are still a family. We just don't live together. And, there may be a time when we can have a discussion that's not emotionally charged and blaming anybody. It's just, making more sense of it to you.
You know what? That made me think all of that. I wonder who tells what happened first. Is it the mom or the dad?
You know, um, I would say that the kids figure it out, because if it was an extramarital relationship, generally speaking, that relationship is still going on. And I have, in my experience, it is men who are like think nothing of, like, hey guys, let's come have a drink with my new friend. So they put it together pretty quickly, because men just, do
And
that more often.
that's what I was thinking. I was thinking it's possibly the man, whether it is deliberate or not.
Right. It's like, well, they're like, yeah, well, we've moved on, so meet my new friend, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, now things are making more sense.
And they start to ask questions like, how long have you known each other? And then they just put things together. That's all. Yeah. Hmm. I get that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So basically, don't give them any dirty details. That's just inappropriate.
I think so. It's just that's my, I feel like that's a better way with which to move forward in our lives. And it disparaging the father of your children hurts your children more than it hurts him. It doesn't, because most kids, they don't really want to know, and they should forgive their parents, both of them, for, their mistakes and being human. So, yes, I think dirty details, keep it out. It's just not appropriate. And it's not going to be good for your relationship with your child.
Is this also possibly a time when there's a role reversal where the parent becomes the child and the child becomes the parent emotionally?
It can very much. It can very much. And sometimes even financially, if and that depends, if that's the role you're playing and you're like, oh, I need your help, my dad, your dad's so bad, whatever, is taking all the money. That puts added stress on the children. And I would avoid it. Just be mindful that you still are the parent, and it's really always a good idea to set boundaries, and not look for your children to fill this loss of your spouse, because they're, at this great point in their life, and they've got a lot of other stuff going on.
Heather, you say that you're not a mental health therapist or what have you, but you answer these questions like you are. I can appreciate it. I'm coming to you with
Well, yeah, I have the life experience, right? That I've seen a lot of things, and I've read a lot, so that and a lot of times it's like, hey, what is the right thing to do? And that's how my advice hopefully falls.
yeah, yeah. So, what about the children's relationship with their siblings? I wonder if that changes. Like, if they have siblings, does this change the dynamic?
I think it does. Children definitely naturally bond together, because they're like, hey, well, at least we all still have each other, even if they're not going to be together. And or they may, I think, depending, it can be very much like, oh, one feels more sympathy for one parent versus the other. One may have more anger at one parent versus the other. So I think, yeah, there's going to be, certainly initially there's going to be you, the siblings are going to feel one way or another about it. And yeah, that'll be a change, but I think most of the times the siblings know they have each other, even though they may have different feelings about, how the parents are handling it, or which parent they are. They're going to naturally feel like they're aligning with one versus another.
Yeah. And I also thought about, if one parent is just really bitter about the whole situation, it could also change the dynamic of the relationship with other family members, like the extended family.
Yes, indeed. Because, again, many times depending on the length of the marriage and the relationships prior to, frankly, sometimes that extended family does include your husband's family. And those relationships you really don't want to change. And a lot of times they don't have to. Of course, that's not all within your control. But certainly it's a factor. So um, we I guess the best thing is because you don't know how the extended family, but yeah, if you're really bitter and really angry, you're not going to really be able to have probably a good relationship with those other folks because, like, you guys, they're not going to want to be around you. And, if you're going to be negative and angry.
And possibly that negative or angry parent may not try to get their children to continue the relationship with the other family members.
Right. And then that usually ends badly. It might, be successful at first if you're trying to, obstruct some type of relationship, but usually I don't see that lasting very long.
And I remember us talking about this briefly in another episode. Do the grandparents have any rights?
No, no, they don't. But you've got adult children, so they can go and see who they want and um, continue those relationships. And hopefully, grandparents of both sides still, want to have relationships with those grandchildren. And that just depends on the bitterness and everything of the divorce and angry and things like that. And again, that's why, like, a lot of that stuff that's going to happen as a result of divorce are beyond your control. You can't control other people's behavior, their emotions, their feelings, but you can control your own and how you show up in those situations. And that's why, if you keep that in mind, like, hey, I'm going to be the grown up, I am going to try not to escalate any anger and bad feelings because enough of that may go on anyway.
Now let's fast forward a little bit in life. Well, I guess it really depends on how old the children are whenever the parents get divorced. But let's fast forward a little bit to those special occasions. Let's say a wedding. You don't want to be excluded from a wedding because you're bitter.
That's correct. And, they're right because that's their day. And you certainly want to participate and not make it all about, you know, their divorced parents and that they can't be in the same room or how we handle things. And I, I know there are going to be a lot of people listening. They're going to be like, well, it is difficult and it may be, but you don't have to be the difficult one. You can just understand, like I said, you can't control how your ex is going to behave. You can't control their feelings, emotions. You can only control your own. And so you can only really try to take the high road and continue that relationship with your children without bad mouthing the other, you know, parent, because then they're not going to want you around if you're just only going to talk badly. And there are going to be these events, and you guys are going to hopefully both be there, or at least the person taking the high road. It's like, hey, you want to be invited and you want to be included. So be the person and act like the person that other people want around.
Another thing I thought about, put things into perspective. That event may last like 3 hours or so.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can hang in for that amount of time.
Exactly. And there's going to be so many of them. And you're not going to want to miss out. You really aren't. And I think the way it starts is truly at the very beginning, like we said, like this does set the tone and for your not necessarily new relationship, it'll be just changed relationship with your children because it's going to be you just as their mom, not as mom and dad together. That's all it is. And it really doesn't have to be that changed. And you set the tone at the very beginning and how you handle yourself throughout this. And that's really going to benefit you long term.
All right, Heather, we are almost at the end of our time here today. Anything else you'd like to add? Any parting words?
Well, as always, for our listeners, if there is anyone that is going through this or knows someone who is, we are here at Florida Women's Law Group for them and for them to call and schedule a consultation.
And of course, you can go to our website, womenwinningdivorce.com, to listen to other episodes of the show. Heather, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Same with you, Julie. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Women Winning Divorce. We hope you found information to help you navigate your divorce. If you like our show, please take the time to subscribe and provide a 5-star review. If you need more information, please visit our website at womenwinningdivorce.com, where you will find previous episodes and other helpful content. Join us next week as we continue our journey of women winning divorce.